Why is the exhibition called Style In Revolt?
It's really to sort of give a nod to the fact that all of the, I would say, subcultural elements that are involved in the show that we're talking about are coming from a place of sort of like revolution, rebellion, I would say. And you know, all of the subcultures that we're talking, whether it's skate, you know, hip hop, and then all the subsequent things that have come out of that, because I would say they're really the two kind of key ones that are driving most of the sort of original sort of foundation of this. It's definitely very, very heavily style driven. So there's a big music element, but I think as with all youth cultures, really, since youth culture existed, I guess, from the 60s or the end of the 50s, let's be more precise, from the end of the 50s, when the teenager kind of got, you know, created as a thing or identified. That sense of sort of rebellious youth has always been sort of represented through a particular type of style and code of dress that they want to sort of ally themselves with what particular tribe they're from. So that was kind of the basis behind it. Rebellious youth that express their kind of allegiance to something through style.
So I guess you were a rebellious youth. Is that how you got into street culture?
I don't think I was that rebellious. I was attracted towards things that were not the mainstream. I was interested in disrupting things, but not disrupting things personally. I haven't been involved in sort of, you know, aggressive rebellion or anything like that.
How about you, Edison? What attracted you to street culture and streetwear?
Just to double down on what Fraser was talking about, you know, especially with the I'd say the title name. Obviously, that was, you know, the Fraser and his team's creation. But you know, for the location of the exhibition, which is in Beijing, which is in China, I think that I have been at the forefront of kind of pushing that culture. So if you rewind back to say 99, 2000, when I started actually becoming a person of influence, people were making fun of how I dressed. Like, you know, I'm like oversized clothes, like, you know, what's this hip hop? Like, why are you so outspoken? And you know, it wasn't really me trying to rebel or revolt. It was just a representation of who I was, you know, and not necessarily did it fit in at that moment. But you know, as time grown and you know, more and more people are you know, participating in hip hop and street dance and so many other, you know, fashion, all these things that, you know, have been bubbling. I think that China and Beijing is the reason why this exhibition is happening, because all these new things are exploding, and it's kind of like a new page. And when something's new, it's always seen as like a threat maybe, and people are uncomfortable with it. But I think that the testament of street culture is that now it has become mainstream culture. And it's become something that everyone somehow enjoys. Like, you know, from, it could be music, it could be a collectible toy, it could be art, it could be fashion. And I think that, you know, the thesis of this exhibition is very fitting for, you know, not only the time of youth culture, street culture, but also at this moment in Chinese kind of youth culture exploding at the moment, and them being able to see the history through the lens of people that actually lived through it. It's very important right now for them to be able to sample something not just told to them by the internet, but actually curated by people that are thoroughbreds in it, because the internet can sometimes be misleading. And you know, I'm fully supportive of the movement and fully supportive of the team handling this.
This is like a new city that's now taking part in the culture that's kind of bounced around from New York to London to LA to Tokyo, and now, you know, there's a showcase in Beijing that's going to be seen by a lot of eyes that don't necessarily know the beginning. And so I'm curious, like, what is it that how did you start to kind of edit and put together what was like essential to display?
There is no way to actually say that there's any definitive version of this particular thing. This is always going to be subjective. So you could get another bunch of people to do this show and it would have some similar elements for sure, but it wouldn't be exactly the same. So it really is ultimately fair to say that, you know, myself and Paul, and then some of the other people that have been involved in it, like A-Side and Sammy, that were, you know, a generation slightly younger than us, a good 10 years or so, in Sammy's case, a good 20 years younger or more. They will have come across it in different ways. So I think everybody is kind of relating it to where they first had that sort of aha moment where they started to feel this thing was something that spoke to them. So we decided, because of our age, and I don't think it's just the timing. I was in London, Paul was in New York. The one sort of line in the sand that we sort of looked at was when Malcolm McLaren, post really doing the punk and the end of that stuff, went to New York and discovered what was the burgeoning beginning of like hip hop. And so Dark Rock as an album was his first solo album, other than, kind of producing other people, depicting this new culture that nobody had seen. And he involved like the art, the dance and the music. And so I think for a lot of people, that was the first time they saw this thing, embodied in this video, which was Buffalo Girls, which we have in the exhibition. So for us, that was like ground zero, but it's really not ground zero because there are things before that added to it. And, you can go back to the 70s. I know there were people breakdancing in the 70s. And, the skateboarding side of stuff certainly started before that and really came to, was a big, powerful boom in the late 70s as well.
Electronics, right? It was like kind of the digital culture came into the mix, right? Because we have like an actual like remix and scratching going on.
I think musically speaking, definitely, because, of course you've got turntables, but they just start to use them in a different way, manipulating the records. But drum machines as well, that didn't exist. So definitely you're right, like technology, you wouldn't have things like house music if certain kind of equipment wasn't invented and then people used it in a way that it wasn't necessarily intended for. A lot of this stuff is kind of almost happens as a result of, but not perhaps the intent. It's kids taking stuff and kind of reappropriating it, which is really the theme of the whole exhibition all the way through, all the way up until today, actually.
And then like for you, Edison, what were some elements that you thought were like super essential to include for Beijing and for the kids in China now to see?
I think I definitely gave Fraser a lot of, insight on just what I felt like locally made sense. And I think, and they pass it off to the team. I've just been a supporting force to try to connect the dots and really be the kind of like the local anchor to show that it is an international thing and that, someone from the region is also in the mix. And just being a part of the exhibition is a blessing for me, because like I grew up idolizing all these people that some of them I later became friends with, and to be on, even spoken about in the same conversation for me is gratitude to everyone, So one thing that I did tell Fraser and them was that it's important to show the connectivity to how it's affected local people, especially at the end of, I'd say, the show, because I would say that the future not only is in China, but it's very much there, especially with these past few years, with the pandemic and everything. The locals in China have actually been able to enjoy lifestyle, and lifestyle creates inspiration, and inspiration breeds creativity, right? So, seeing even just kind of like street snaps and stuff now, it's like, you see these Chinese people like on the street taking pictures of each other, kind of like trying to spread that. Even the photographer is a part of the energy, even though they might not be dressing in that fashionable way, they're trying to showcase what's happening there. And it's actually pretty interesting. And I feel like kind of leaving the show at a question mark of like, what's next and how are you going to be involved is something that's very important, I think, locally. And hopefully a lot of people can get inspired by this show. And, in 3 or 4 years, maybe they, if they actually become someone successful, they can go back to this exhibition and be like, this moment really inspired me. And I think that's really, I think that's an important thing that Fraser and them would, have been curating for.
That's a very, very big point. And Edison has been incredibly supportive, one of the most supportive people. And, we've been since the inception of this, actually, obviously. I mean, we've worked together over many years. I actually met Edison first time I was in the store that I used to run in London before the 90 days and everything else. This is like 20 years ago at least. I think you were into vape and that kind of stuff then, because we were selling.
Yep. I came out to Hideout and I bought something and you rung me out and I was like, oh my God, that's the dude. Yeah, a few years later we connected and started to work with each other. So it was everything's organic, and I think that that's what also is about the culture, is that nothing is forced, because you can't force it. Like it's all just creativity that kind of spawned everything out of here. So
when it's forced, it's people sort of smell it out. When it's not really real. I think what Edison said is very important as well, and that was definitely the intention for me. I hope, and I know that the rest of the team that worked on this hope that this serves as some sort of like insight behind like where some of this stuff is coming from, because they weren't around at the time. Because for sure in China, it wasn't actually sort of experiencing this stuff at the same time at all. And it's incredible because I went to actually Beijing and Shanghai in 2005 for the first time, and to see the change. I mean, I've been many times to China, but I haven't been able to go back for a couple of years now. The last time was actually to one of Edison's events. But I think there's still, even this exhibition in a Western city would still have elements that a lot of kids won't know about, just because it's old information. One of the things I was thinking about today was, and it's just to give a mention, obviously it's been very sad that Virgil Abloh passed away. When you look at his the show that was in Miami was more like a redo of the show that he had as a video, as a film. But if you look at the subject matter for that, and it was called Our Men Break, which is taken from a record that was sampled, that was on the Ultimate Breaks and Beats compilation that we talk about in the exhibition. And then some of the clothing that was created says like Vuitton Rockers, which is basically completely inspired by like Dynamic Rockers, which was a New York breakdancing crew. And there's so many things that I could call out. There's hip hop elements. You've got people from Wu-Tang Clan in the film. Goldie from London did the music and is also in the film. These are all people that have sort of come through this specific culture. There's almost been this kind of current end state embodiment of all of these elements in something that's like very visible to most of the people that will be looking at this will have seen that, I think, or a lot of the people will have seen that, but might not actually be able to pick up on, kind of where are those little sort of elements or inspirations coming from. Hopefully this will serve to give you the clues to be able to, like, if you're interested, to find out a little bit more about where this stuff's coming from. Again, like within the show, things like, Kim Jones working with Sean Stussy, most people know Stussy, the company. They might not know everything about the roots of it or the person that started it. Some of the designs that he did at the beginning that were highly iconic, which again, as we just mentioned, drew people like us towards it, were kind of redone and reimagined for Dior. But maybe not everybody realizes that, that kind of wavy, which is called like Tom graphic, bright colored knitwear or whatever that Kim made, comes from these old Stussy items that are Sean's artwork. I'm just giving one example. So it's like, it's all there. It's all visually very lovely to see it. But if you want to, you can actually sort of like dig deeper and also find a lot of repetition as well. There's a lot about repetition there, stuff that is being kind of over the course of like, I guess it's about 40 years because we're talking about the 80s, as a sort of a start point. But you can see certain elements being sort of reappropriated at certain points every decade by somebody in a different way.
Can you kind of connect one of those or two of those dots for us?
It's like same as Edison just said, he was really happy to be able to end up through what he was doing, to be working with people that he was inspired by. We recreated with the guys that did the Duck Rock art direction and album cover, the boombox, with the guy that made it, which was on the cover, through Nick Egan, the art director, who worked with Malcolm McLaren. That has a Dondi graffiti on the front that says Duck Rock. So, and that's also in the video. So that was that kind of start point. Several years later, Supreme did a collection that was dedicated to Duck Rock, used Dondi's graphics amongst other stuff. And then more recently, Virgil Abloh did a collection for Off-White, which used Dondi's artwork again, which is, kind of like all done in a different way, but it's kind of like, for somebody that might have just experienced the Dondi collection as part of Off-White, I don't know if they were necessarily aware of where that all came from unless they take the time to understand it. So all of this stuff is like, we're just trying to sort of present like, these are the building blocks of this. Also celebrate the new. There's a lot of, Edison's, been really sort of championing a lot of through his own work and some of the other brands that he does, championing some of the new expressions of this movement.
Edison, when you you were kind of a fan initially of the culture and of these different brands and personalities. Like when you started your own thing with Clot, what did you want to bring into it? Like coming from Asia, what did you think was important for you to? How did you form your identity? Basically, what did you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Vancouver in a very Western way. I moved to Hong Kong when I was about 10 and started, I went to an international school. So it was still, I was still mixing locally, but still kind of my upbringing is in a Western culture. Being able to be someone of influence in a region where I didn't grow up in, I had to start kind of doing a little bit of homework, trying to figure out where my background, where my roots are as a Chinese person. And, being at the same time, being a fan of street culture and not really seeing it evident in that, in Chinese world, And like I said, in the beginning, it was almost like people were like, why is this guy so wild? Why is he being so different than everyone? And it wasn't like something that I was trying. It wasn't forced. It was just what I liked. It was how I dressed. This is just how I talk. This is how I am. And it's funny because I had never thought that I could be a part of this. I never, just like Fraser said, I didn't have any traditional kind of education in it. I was brought up in it. I lived it. And, one trip I had a little bit of a, I don't know, kind of disagreement with the way that the entertainment world was working with me. So I escaped to Japan and I met a bunch of, like I told you, my idols. And, they had seen some of my movies and they were like, hey, what are you doing here? I'm like, look, I'm trying to find myself. And they're like, you already know who you are. And I'm like, oh, okay. And they're like, hey, how about you love fashion? Let's build something in fashion in Hong Kong together. Because at that time, I think Hong Kong, and still now, I mean, I'm not throwing salt in Hong Kong, but at that time, a lot of people were traveling in and out of Hong Kong. They loved Hong Kong. And it so happened to be that I was in Hong Kong. So I went back to Hong Kong with a refound kind of direction. Is I'm going to start this movement, and it's going to represent everything that I love. I'm going to push hip hop. I'm going to push our street culture. I'm going to start my own brand. I'm going to open a store, and I'm going to try to get as many people to come along with me as possible. Our first store was on the third floor of a building, which you had to kind of get a buzzer entrance to, and now we have, I think 15, 16 stores. And, it's not just because of our hard work. It's also because the local acceptance of what we're doing has grown exponentially. I mean, Fraser can tell you the first time he came to China, people maybe were in a mode kind of like, oh, I'm here, and now they're fully like, I'm here and this is me, and it's great to see people expressing themselves and finding a way to healthily kind of show the world like, this is me, accept it, and in a way that's not kind of like controversial or confronting. And I think that people inspire people, and being able to showcase who you are, what you like, and what you believe in, kind of really aesthetically defines that in a moment. And I think that that's been important. We said that we wanted to, our mission statement at Clot is bridging East and Western cultures, and kind of being that highway of, we can go here, which thankfully over 15, 18 years of our company, now we work with international companies, but also we are this way back there too, and the things that we've done, we've done trade shows, and, Style In Revolt is happening now. And, we're just happy to be a part of the energy, and hopefully to inspire that next generation to really excel.
I mean, also on some of the stuff that we've worked on, you've always tried, and beyond, you've always tried to infuse in some of it Chinese elements, traditional Chinese elements, in a really creative and sort of interesting way. Whether it was the, sort of foot massage and acupuncture and stuff like that, with the sneakers, or, just really interesting elements that, great stories, that are very Chinese as well.
It's tradition, and it's just our spin on it, and it's a spin, I think, that is very modern, and that's that. And I'm thankful that people from all around the world appreciate our work, and not necessarily every time do we kind of put the Asian element in it, but we kind of market, especially to now in China, where a lot of people are saying, made in China, made in China, made in China is important. But made in China just means that you're Chinese. That's all that it doesn't have to have a dragon on it. It doesn't have to have a silk, and I think that that's important for the youth to kind of see through this is that it's really from within. It's from you. It's not like supposed to be from Edison. Edison's already had his rendition, and the next, who's going to be the next guy? And what do you have to say, and what do you have to represent, and how do you pick up? Like I picked up from say Nigo or Hiroshi and stuff like that, because I'm maybe like the fourth generation of this culture, third or fourth generation, and Kanye, Pharrell, Hiroshi, Nigo are definitely those four guys for me. You know what I mean? I didn't try to emulate them, but I definitely kind of took a few cues from what they did and try to formulate what was my own. And I think that this exhibition definitely shows different perspectives and different time frames and different time periods, and really opening up the question to, are you the next one?
Exactly. And if you look at all those guys that you just mentioned, Pharrell, Kanye, Nigo, Hiroshi, etc. I'd add Virgil in there as well from my side. Yeah. But I think that the main thing that's really key with all those people is that it's very much an embodied, like music is super important as a base. I think that is the base of all of this, to be honest. And then there's the art element. The style element is the kind of ends sort of like canvas that expresses an allegiance or sort of connection to this. A hell of a lot of this stuff comes from music and that kind of expression, and so that's important as well, I think, too. Otherwise it's just a costume if you're not actually kind of aware of any of the stuff behind.
Fraser, can you talk about the defining characteristics of the origin of that first period of the exhibition?
Like Genesis period is really about before all this stuff was kind of put together as it was the beginning of people sort of trying to sort of put it together as a culture. So you had people kind of doing graffiti art, which we look at within that. We have people that are breakdancing. There's people you've got Martha Cooper and some of the other photography that's in the show, Josh Chuse and stuff like that, where they were recording that stuff at the time. There was a beginning of a new music, which was rap and hip hop, really. I mean, hip hop is kind of like all of it together, but you had the beginning of that. You also had like a kind of, I guess, really a lot of it was coming out of New York. There is a London element as well, but the very beginnings of it coming out of New York. So it's really the raw ingredients in the first section, all the way through to as this started to seep and kind of cross-pollinate with stuff going on in London and then Tokyo. And I believe, we kind of end up with sort of Harajuku and ultimately Sean Stussy, and really the beginning of the first dedicated brand that kind of pulled together all these elements. There's skate in there as well. I mean, skate's very important. Most of the people, again, Pharrell used to skate, Hiroshi used to skate, I used to skate, Paul used to skate, Virgil definitely used to skate. So most of the people I know that are involved in this movement have a roots in one or more of those things. So we're just that's the basis, the foundation.
And then we get to the boom. So how would you characterize that? What's going on in that period?
The boom is really the expansion in kind of adoption and awareness spread around the globe, more people kind of aware of it, more success, the internet coming into play that really played a huge part to exponentially kind of show this stuff to people. Whereas, the Genesis periods, for people of my generation, if you wanted to find out about stuff, you had to either find it on a record cover. So we have record covers in there because there was no internet, or magazines or VHS tapes. You might see, like a movie like Flashdance had like 2 minutes of breakdancing in it that everyone went to see just for that 2 minutes and didn't really care about the rest of the film, that type of thing, So information was very scarce. Lots of brands that were inspired by this initial, and different people, different creative talents started to put out music and art and brands that were all part of this, initial spark. It was the sort of ignition point, really.
Edison, the new wave and street look section, which is now and future, could you talk about how you could characterize that section?
I obviously run my own brand, but I also support a lot of young designers right now, and see how some, they all are very different. They all operate very different, but they're all still successful, which is very interesting to me, because there's not really a formula of like, this is how to do it, right? And it all comes back to the identity and what you have to say and what you represent. And I think that the coming years for youth culture are going to be very interesting, with that element of, the young designers now, they only lived with internet, like not like what Fraser was saying, where you had to really search and hunt for it, right? Like the first time I went to Japan, I had to carry 4 magazines with me that had little mini maps in them. And I had to be like, is this the street? Is this the street? And I might miss it, and now where you just press a button, you're like, oh, this is where I can find this. It's the convenience of it also changes the way that you create, right?
Yeah, in a way, it makes things faster and a little less, I hate to say, of value sometimes, because there's always something else like tomorrow. So you're really excited about something for a very short space of time, whereas, time's sped up, basically. Although they're all connected through some kind of, general philosophy of sorts, they're expressing it in very different ways, and that's a depiction of that.
It seems like one of the reasons this keeps regenerating is like, it's really, you need a computer, you need a t-shirt, and then a story, right? I mean, it's like the access, the first point of access is so like kind of seamless and possible.
Whether it's skateboarding, whether it was like, you just pick up a board, you don't need a team, you can go and do stuff on your own. So it generally attracts people that are kind of less kind of like part of the herd and more individualistic, it seems. There's no sort of like barrier to get into this other than your own kind of imagination and willingness to just have a go.
Edison, what's a piece or part of the show? I know that you loaned a lot of clothes for the show, and I know that you've, since like for many, many years have supported different designers. Is there any particular piece or part of the show that really resonates with you, that is really connected to your own story or inspiration?
The Polo Ralph Lauren and Clot collaboration. It's the ultimate kind of meeting point of my life and the culture. Whereas when I was a young buck, I would wear a polo and I would be like, I feel good, like I'm feeling myself. And it being such an American heritage brand, but then now translated through a Chinese creative director and a Chinese brand and targeted at the Asian market, is kind of like a exclamation mark of what we've been able to do at Clot. We grew up as fans of Nike and Jordan, watching Jordan play, getting us to listen to hip hop, then wearing baggy clothes, to who we are now, and being able to work with these international brands and having them accept us into their world and allowing us to put a lens on what is supposedly a worldwide phenomenon is very important to me. And it's also, it just goes back, I hate to sound like a broken record, but I'm a 41-year-old man, and I've been enjoying this culture since I would say 12 or 13, and it's been many years. And trying to be able to be the liaison for the next person, and really, especially in China, like I would never have thought that we would be able to do these things, but organically we grew, we believed in ourselves, and here we are showcasing our finest moments in one of the most prolific kind of exhibitions that has ever been done on our culture.
It's really impressive, and I know it was a total labor of love on everyone's part, and I think it's going to have a major impact.
Love Fraser, love everyone involved in it, and definitely want to inspire some youth in China. So everybody who's watching this interview in China, you guys got to go to Beijing, SKP, check this out, because you're going to miss out if you don't.
Thanks to SKP-S and the team, seriously, to give us the opportunity to make this happen.
All right, cheers.
Take care.